Today, lesson 10A, multiplying integers. We've been working a lot on adding and subtracting integers by various different methods. We're going to kind of take the same philosophy today with multiplying integers. So today, you're going to be able to determine the rules for multiplying integers. We're also going to do a little bit of practice on writing multiplication problems as repeated addition. And as usual, we have a reason, one of the many reasons why we are learning this. Okay, so once again, in adding and subtracting, we learned with multiple methods. And eventually I told you, pick the way that works best for you. We're going to use the same strategy for multiplication today. So in third grade, when you first learned how to do multiplication, we're going to sort of review some of those ways that you learned in the third grade. So first of all, we have 3 times 5, 3 times 5, and 3 times 5. That's 3 times 5 written 3 different ways. And I'm sure that all of you have seen those ways before. So all of these represent 3 times 5. And 3 times 5 can be thought of as 3 groups of 5. And you may not remember this, but this is the way that you first learn multiplication in the third grade. So there's one group of 5. There's another group of 5. And there is a third group of 5. How many circles are there? Just say it. 15. They're 15 because we have 3 groups of 5 circles. That's 15 circles altogether. That's with symbols. You also learned using what we call repeated addition. So we have 3 5s that we're adding together, much like the 3 rows of 5 circles there, and we have 15 altogether. And that is what is referred to as repeated addition. Well, we can use some of those same strategies to deal with multiplying integers. So here we have 4 times negative 2. Here's another way of writing 4 times negative 2. Here's a third way of writing 4 times negative 2. All of these represent 4 times negative 2. 4 times negative 2 can be thought of as 4 groups of negative 2. In other words, 4 groups of 2 negatives. So there's one group of 2 negatives. There's another. There's a third. There's a fourth. So in this group of symbols here, how many negative symbols do we have altogether? We have 8 negatives. So 4 times negative 2 must be negative 8. And it is. We could also use repeated addition. 4 negative 2's that we're adding together. And if we gather all of our negatives together, much like the picture of symbols here, we end up with negative 8. All right. So those are 2 different ways of multiplying integers. We could also use a number line if we chose to do so. 4 times negative 2, we would start at 0, and we would jump 4 in the 4 groups of 2 in the negative direction. So there's one group of negative 2, and then we could do it again, again, and again. And I've got a little sloppy there with my drawing, but it would look like this, and that would leave us at negative 8. So there's a third way of figuring out what 4 times negative 2 is. But we could also use another method, and this is the method that most of you will probably choose. If we think of the commutative property, and this is the second time that we've talked about the commutative property. The commutative property says that if we have addition or multiplication, we can do things out of order. So I could think of it like this. So when I do a multiplication problem like this, I'm going to think of the negative symbol as representing the opposite. Okay? And then I'm going to take my 2 times 4, and I'm going to multiply my 2 times 4 together. What is 2 times 4, by the way?
8.
Say that again?
8.
It's 8. So what is the opposite of 8?
Negative 8.
It's negative 8. This is another way, and I refer to this as opposite multiplication, where we can utilize things that we already know, like the idea of opposite and the idea of regular multiplication, and we can figure out multiplication of integers. Same thing here. The opposite of 2 times 4, which is the opposite of 8, that's negative 8. Or the third way of writing multiplication, the opposite of 2 times 4, which is 8, and that leads us to negative 8. Okay, so now, let's take a look at these problems. And they're all the same thing. They all represent negative 8. It's negative 7 times negative 8. So we're going to use this idea of opposite multiplication. Okay? This means we're going to take the opposite. But before we do that, we're going to figure out what 7 times negative 8 is. So it's here that you have to decide what works best for you. You might think 7 groups of 8 negatives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's one group. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so on. If we did that, by the way, anybody have any idea how many negatives we would have right here? 56 of them. So we're going to find the opposite of negative 56. By the way, what is the opposite of negative 56? It's positive 56. So what that means is that negative 7 times negative 8 using opposite multiplication is positive 56. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to see some sort of pattern as we're multiplying these. And since all three of these represent the same thing, it's all the same. The opposite of negative 56. So negative 7 times negative 8 is 56. Okay. So what I'm basically saying right here is I don't care which method you use, but you need to figure out how to multiply 6 times negative 3. Everybody try number 1. So there are a number of reasons why the answer to this is negative 18. Here's one. Opposite multiplication. I'm going to flip this around using the commutative property. And opposite multiplication means we're going to find the opposite of whatever that times that is. 3 times 6 is 18. The opposite of 18 is negative 18. There's one way. You could do repeated addition. 6 groups of negative 3. Negative 3 plus 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 negative 3. That is 18 negatives. That will be 18 negatives altogether. You could use symbols. 6 groups of negative 3. It doesn't matter, but the key is you need to realize that 6 times negative 3 is negative 18. Everybody try number 2. Okay, so the answer to this one is positive 36. Why? There are a number of reasons, but I imagine some of you have already kind of figured out what the pattern is. But for others, if I were you, this is what I would be doing. I would be going to the opposite multiplication. So the opposite of this times this. So for the 4 times negative 9, you need to think of 4 groups of negative 9. Well, 4 groups of 9 negatives means you have 36 negatives. So now you need to do the opposite of negative 36, and that, of course, is positive 36. Doesn't matter what method you use as long as you can figure it out. Okay? All right, everybody try 3 through 6. Number 3 is negative 9 times 6. What do we think? Yes? It is negative 54. There are many reasons why. Here's one reason. The opposite of 9 times 6. 9 times 6 is 54. The opposite of that is negative 54. You have to find a way that will allow you to find the answer to things like this. Number 4 should be what?
Positive 24.
Say that again.
Positive 42.
Positive 42. There we go. There are many reasons why that's positive 42. One is using opposite multiplication. Look at what I'm doing here. 7 times negative 6. That's 7 groups of 6 negatives. That would be 42 negatives. But we then have to find the opposite of that, and that's why the product is positive 42. All right. Number 5 should be what? And let's make sure we use the sentence frame.
product of number 5 is positive 42.
Very good. The product is positive 42. Once again, here's one reason why. The opposite of 3 groups of 14 negatives, so that would be the opposite of negative 42, and that is positive 42. And then how about number 6? Yes?
Positive 84.
Anybody disagree with positive 84? This is where we have to be very careful.
The product of number 6 is negative 84.
It's negative 84. Now, there are lots of reasons why. Here's one reason. I'm going to use the commutative property. I like the negative number to be first if only one of them is negative. So then we are finding, Bushra, the opposite of that times that, right? So 7 times 12 is 84. The opposite of 84 is negative 84, okay? All right, let's finish off through number 10, please. So as we've already figured out so far, we know that the answer to this one is either going to be positive 96 or negative 96. Which one is it, positive or negative?
Negative.
Negative. And we could do the opposite multiplication, and we'd end up with the opposite of 96, which is negative 96. Will this be positive 28 or negative 28?
Negative.
Negative 28. The opposite of 28. Positive or negative 72? Yeah, that one's obvious. Positive or negative 45? Positive, because we're finding the opposite of negative 45. All right, so let's kind of piece this together. I'm hoping that by now you have discovered what the pattern for multiplying integers is. I just asked that question a few minutes ago, and many of you think you've figured it out. So, if you haven't, well, then you have to go to one of these methods that we talked about today. So, off to the side, these 4 are not in your notes, just off to the side in your notes, copy them down, quickly find the answer to all 4 of them. Okay, let's see what we have here. 6 times 2, positive or negative?
Positive.
I don't remember which one is next, but let's, negative 6 times negative 2, positive or negative?
Positive.
Okay. Negative 6 times 2, positive or negative?
Negative.
Negative. And once again, if you're not sure, do the opposite thing. Opposite of 6 times negative 2. 6 times negative 2 is negative 12. The opposite of that is 12. Same thing with this one right here. The opposite of 6 times 2. 6 times 2 is 12. So the opposite of that is negative 12. And then the last one, 6 times negative 2. Positive or negative?
Negative.
Negative 12. All right. Have you recognized any patterns? How many of you now think you have the pattern down? If you have it, you can do all of these multiplication problems in just a few seconds. Okay? All right, let's continue on. Quickly do number 11 and 12. Number 11 should be what, Angel? Positive 15, good. Number 12 should be what, Josh?
Negative 32.
Negative 32. Okay. But now how do we deal with these multiple integer problems? Well, the commutative property tells us that if we only have adding in any sort of math problem or multiplication, we could do things out of order. Now, I imagine most of you would go left to right. So that's the way that I'm going to approach these. So in number 13, what is 2 times negative 3? What is it? That part right there is negative 6. And now we want to multiply that by 5. So now the question is, what is negative 6 times 5?
Negative 30.
Negative 30. Good. That's how I want you to attack number 14 and number 15. So everybody try number 14 and number 15. Please use the correct sentence frame. Number 14. Very good. The product is 12. And the reason is because negative 2 times negative 1 is 2, and then 2 times that 6 is 12. How about number 15?
The product for 15 is 42.
Is it 42?
Negative 42.
It should be negative 42, and here's the reason why. Negative 7 times negative 2 is 14, and then 14 times negative 3 is negative 42, for all the different reasons that we have talked about. So before we go on to the last thing for today, off to the side towards the bottom, I would like you to write down these 4 problems. We're going to try this sort of idea one more time. These are all multiplication. Find the answer to all 4 of those. The hope at this point is that all of us understand and have figured out what the pattern is with regards to multiplying integers. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to turn to your shoulder partner, talk about the answers and why they are what they are, and also, if you have discovered what the pattern is, quickly talk about that as well. I'm going to give you about 45 seconds. Go. All right, heard lots of discussion. Most of us realize that the answer to the first one is negative 32. The answer to the second one is positive 32. The answer to the third one is negative 32. And the answer to the fourth one is positive 32. There's a reason why both of these have an answer that is positive. And there is also a reason why the product here is negative and the product here is negative. The hope is that you can kind of figure that out on your own. Tomorrow, at the end of the discussion of division, we will go through what those rules really are. But the reason why I'm not just handing them to you right now is because you will remember it longer if you discover it on your own. All right, let's go to the back side of the notes. And a quick background knowledge. And we need to review what these words mean as integers so that you can deal with the word problem. So a gain of 5 yards is a positive 5. A loss, is that positive or negative?
Negative.
A deposit, is that positive or negative? Positive. A penalty.
Negative.
A profit.
Negative.
It's a positive. Profit means you're what's that? What's that?
So withdraw maybe.
Well, we're not on withdrawal yet. Profit means you're making money. Withdrawal is negative. 2 hours before is negative. 30 degrees above is positive. All right, so let's go to number 16. What we want to do is we want to write these as a multiplication problem, answer that multiplication problem, and then actually answer the problem as a complete sentence. So we're going to do this one together, and then I'll have you do number 17 and 18. Borrowing. All right. From each of 8 different people means each person you're borrowing $7 from. So 7 times negative 8 is negative 56. And now we need to answer this problem as a complete sentence. So how much money do you owe? You would say, I owe, or you owe, a total of $56. So we want to write a math problem that represents whatever's being talked about in the word problem. We want to find the answer to that multiplication problem and then write our answer as a complete sentence. So, everybody do number 17 and number 18. Let's take a look at number 17 and number 18. Number 17, the temperature decreased 4 degrees per hour. That is represented with a negative 4. And it's doing that for 8 hours. So that would be multiplied by 8. That, of course, is negative 32 for a number of different reasons. Answering the problem with a complete sentence, would be something like this. The temperature decreased a total of 32 degrees. So you need to make sure you have a sentence that means the same thing. Number 18, during a recent deep sea dive, you descended 5 feet every minute. That is represented with a -5, and we're doing that for 12 minutes, so that's times 12. That is represented by the integer -60, and so a sentence that represents that could be something like, you descended a total of 60 feet. Any questions? So if you were to summarize what you learned today, what would that be? What would that be? Multiplying integers, exactly. Okay, we are finished for today. Get your name on today's homework, and go ahead and get started.